day was as lovely as any fair memory of summer. And the king rose with the sun, unable to sleep for joy. His new queen lay peacefully, skin as soft as the sheets, as pretty as the rivers, still dreaming. They'd been in love for many years, and now wed. Love was in the bed, and the castle was a home. The king stepped through the sleepy velvet curtains and out onto the fresh oak beams of the balcony. The kingdom had reveled for 3 days of wedding celebrations and now slept. The glistening granite castle perched on the precipice of a rocky outcrop, gifting the king bird's-eye views of his realm, and the town that was built along the spiraling edge of a cliff, sweeping down into the luscious valley below. The king could still see the red rose petals strewn on the winding cobbled streets, and when he closed his eyes, he could hear the echoes of last night's songs. The birds were singing now, and happiness roared in him like a lion. So he went for a walk. Beyond the fields of wheat and corn are the wild meadows, and the king let his hands sweep along the long grass and petals as he walked. Beyond the meadows lie the shadowy forests, and whilst the king would not ordinarily venture there alone, today he forgot himself, for what darkness could lurk in a day so fair? The king had not ventured far into the wolfish wood when he heard a song that enchanted him. The king followed the song, and as he walked, serpents slid under stones, and wolves drew back to watch from behind thorns. Only the gentlest of animals, like the rabbits and the deer, remained in sight, for so fond of the king was nature that no animal would wish to cause him concern. And still the music played, and still the king followed the song. At length, the king wandered to the darkest part of the wood, and there he found an old dry well, and slumped against it, a beggar whose clothes were burned to thin threads, and whose eyes were stung through weeping. "Your singing has bewitched me, beggar." "Oh, these words are but the outpourings of a man who has nothing in the world save the sweetness of sadness and a pretty feather." In that moment, the beggar pulled from beneath his ragged cloak the most astonishing feather that shone like fire and flickered like flame. "Can I hold it?" asked the king, entirely bewitched by its beauty. "Oh, you can have it for a sip of water," replied the beggar, laughing. "You know, you and I are one and the same." The king wanted to argue, but he chose to refrain, because as he took the feather, the heavens broke, dropping beads of rain. "Thank you," said the beggar, cupping his hands and drinking. "You're welcome," replied the king, trembling, hiding the feather beneath his cloak. The petals had washed down the winding cobbled streets and pooled like blood at the bottom. The kingdom was awake now, and the people were ducking in and out of doorways, sheltering from the downpour. The fire burned in the great hall. "You're soaked to the skin. Where were you?" asked the queen. "I dreamed you had left me." "Oh no, my love, I could never. I wandered in the wood, alone. But there are wolves and bandits there." "Oh, well, I only met a beggar." "Oh, he asked me for water, and it started to rain." "I see. How strange. Well, I'm glad you came back to me." "So am I, my love. I'm soaked. I must change." The king kissed the queen then, and as quickly as he could without causing alarm, he disappeared into the armory and bolted the door. His heart pounded and his breath raced as he pulled from beneath his wet cloak the astonishing feather. "You are mine," he grinned, "and I shall never let you go." "What is going on?" the Queen asked the King one evening at dinner. "For weeks, since the wedding, you have not looked at me, nor whispered a word of love. Where is my king?" The King threw down his knife and fork and picked up the steak with his hands. "This meat is too tough." "This is not you, my love. Are you unwell? Is it something I've done? Is there another? Please, say." The King stopped eating then and sat for a moment just staring at the flame. "I am sorry if I have treated you ill, but royal business calls me away." The horse whinnied at the shadows in the darkness and trod cautiously along the thorny path through the mist. "Beggar! Beggar! Tell me, where is the bird that dropped this feather?" The feather shone brightly in the darkness, just enough to see the ragged shapes of crows that watched from the twists of the trees. The darkness followed close, the miles of forest with all its eyes hid in it. "Answer me, beggar, who gave this feather so freely?" But no answer came, and the King drew deeper into the forest until he reached the old dry well, and there he dismounted his horse. "Hello!" he called into the well. "If I shout loud enough, perhaps I'll be heard in hell!" Above, a crow called, and the King looked down at his hands that rested on the wall of the well. His fingers were entwined in thick locks of ash-black hair. Startled, he staggered backwards, and something clattered on the ground. He held the feather so he could see the bones of the beggar, and then there came a howl. His horse reared up and whinnied at the darkness, and with hooves thundering like a terrified hart, galloped off into the woods. And then, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The terrible shapes of 3 giant wolves set pace in pursuit of his horse and disappeared into the mist. "Each of my wolves will grant you a wish," came the watery voice of a dark-haired woman climbing out of the well. "Speak your first wish, and they shall grant it." "I wish for my horse to be spared," blurted the King. "Then let it be." The King heard his horse whinny, and then the howl of the wolves, and then the sound of hooves fading into the meadows of the kingdom. "What more do you wish?" The King turned to see her then. She was beautiful and petrifying to behold. Her skin was pale, as it had seen only darkness, and her eyes shone silver, like they had trapped the moon. Her ash-black hair fell from her shoulders and into the depths of the well, and she stood at least 8 feet tall. The King almost wished for a kiss, but then he remembered the feather, which he held forth in his hands. "I wish to possess the bird that dropped this feather. Then let it be so. But if you ever let the Firebird go, May you burn in her exquisite flames and die. The wolves have returned now, and they stood even taller than the lady from the well, their fangs like daggers, their fur as black as pitch. What more do you wish? The king stopped and thought. I wish never to die from flame. He grinned. Then let it be. But bring me your tears of misery when your heart is drowned in pain. My wolves shall take you home. The lady disappeared into the well and was gone. The largest wolf threw the king onto his thick, furry back, and the king held on. The queen woke uneasily. She had been restless, drifting in and out of sleep, dreaming of poisonous snakes and hidden beasts. She heard the heavy door of the great hall and the moving of tables and chairs. In her bedclothes, she went downstairs, her hand shaking, holding the candle that lit her way. She expected to find the king slithering in the lust of some village girl or drunk and demented with royal business. But instead, she threw back the door to find 3 giant wolves, as black as death, wolfing down freshly butchered meat. I'm sorry. Forgive me. She closed the door as silently as she could before collapsing to the floor. The Firebird was at the top of the tower in a golden cage. And the king spent the night just staring at her, mesmerized, bewitched, disbelieving that he had come to possess such a thing of beauty. The queen stood on the balcony shivering, her eyes possessed by the light that leaked from the tower, her stomach made sick. She did not dare leave the locked room until she was sure the wolves were gone. In the grey gloom of dawn, she saw the beasts, the fur on their chin matted with blood from their feast. Watched them wander down the winding paths of the town. Watched them across the cornfields, across the wild meadows, until they vanished into the blackness of the wood. And then she ran. She ran through the castle weeping, ran to the tower and climbed to the top. The king was there, closing the door and turning the key in the lock. She watched the king take the key and tie it around his neck. My love, there were wolves in the hall. Where have you been? Wolves, replied the smiling king. Shh, 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 shh. It must have been a dream. For a while, the happiness of the kingdom was restored. For the king was joyous, and his joy spread through the realm. But at night, when the queen slipped into dream, the king would slip quietly from the sheets to the tower. Some nights she would awake and find herself in the courtyard below, sleepless and unsettled by the unnatural glow. Some nights she would climb the stairs and could hear faint mutterings inside the locked room. One night, she knocked on the door. Hello? My husband? Won't you come back to bed? But the king never answered, and the door at the foot of the stairs was always locked thereafter. What is that light I see at night in the tower? The queen asked as jovially as she could muster one morning whilst brushing her hair. Must have been a dream, replied the king. You must have been dreaming, dear. Many joyful days passed. Many empty bed nights went by. And the queen asked again the same question, and the king gave the same reply. What is that light I see at night in the tower? You must have been dreaming, dear. As the king spent his nights awake, he would often fall asleep in the day. And so, one afternoon, consumed by curiosity, the queen untied the knot around his neck and slipped off the key. She unlocked the door at the foot of the tower and ascended the spiral steps, not daring to breathe. At the top, she put the key in the lock and gave it a turn. But just as the lock clicked, a serpent slipped beneath the door and bit her on the foot. Thinking quick, she locked the door and staggered down the stairs. She managed to tie the key back around the king's neck before falling to the floor. The queen woke a week later. The king never questioned her, and she never asked again about the light in the tower. They never spoke of it. And the king slipped secretly from sleep sheets no more. Instead, he spent most waking hours behind the bolted door. Inside the locked room, the king's eyes had grown so wide with obsession, they were blistered, and his cheeks were torn through grinning. I love you so much, I could die. The pain of passion's flames bubbled in his veins, and one day his thoughts escaped his lips like steam. I need to see you fly. I need to see you fly. The day was as lovely as any fair memory of summer. And the king rose with the sun, unable to sleep for joy. His queen lay peacefully, skin as soft as the sheets, as pretty as the rivers, still dreaming. He walked through the castle of his great kingdom and admired the mighty granite walls, the windows dressed with great drapes, the fresh oak beams that still held the spirit of the wood. He looked down at the town, the rooftops glistening with dew. He looked at the crops in the valley, the wild flowers in the meadow. Goodbye, he whispered. Goodbye. The flight of the Firebird was majestic, and the king wailed as he set her free. Her vast wings stirred the air, sending spirals of fire like red-hot tornadoes touching down, a firestorm burning all in its way. The flames ravaged the kingdom, and the town, and the crops, and the people. Everything was consumed by the blaze. The king's heart thundered, and his eyes burned with awe. Such destructive beauty, such power, such grace. The kingdom was incinerated to ash, and yet the king remained unscathed. How beautiful! The king whispered to the cinders of his kingdom as his bird vanished in the flame. The king had not ventured far into the wolfish wood when he started to sing. And I cannot sleep for the secrets I keep in the tower. My tears fall to hell for a wish down a well, burn the flower. And as he walked, serpents slid out from under stones, and wolves crept from behind thorns. He wandered to the darkest part of the wood, and wept into the old dry well. His clothes were burned to thin threads, and his eyes were stung through weeping. Suddenly, a king from a kingdom beyond the forest appeared. Your singing has bewitched me, beggar. Oh, these words are but the outpourings of a man who has nothing in the world save the sweetness of sadness and a pretty feather. In that moment, the king pulled from beneath his scorched cloak the astonishing feather. Can I hold it? Asked the king, entirely bewitched by its beauty. Oh, you can have it. For a sip of water. You know, you and I are one and the same. The king wanted to argue, but he chose to refrain, because as he took the feather, the heavens broke, dropping beads of rain.